Now joining me for a preview of the Florida-Alabama game, I'm Dylan Denmark, alongside Shane Matthews, driving back on the road. That's why you can't see him right now, but he's still able to give some time to us. Shane, thanks for the time. And so let's start with this. Florida offensively, their first two games, I think people were really skeptical of Florida being able to run the football because they haven't been able to in the last two seasons, and they've blown it out of the water. Had 400 yards first game, 350, 360 last week against USF. What's been your biggest takeaway from Florida offensively in the first two games?
Well, as you mentioned, we are running the ball very, very well. I think a lot of people, they want to talk about the skill guys, the quarterbacks, the running backs, wide receivers, but I think the offensive line's done a really good job blocking so far, this season. Now, granted, the talent level is going to get a little more difficult Saturday in the Swamp, but for the most part, I think the offensive line's done pretty well. I don't believe they've given up a sack either in the passing game. I could be wrong, but I think we have 0 sacks at this point.
So, for Bryce Young, flipping to Alabama's offense, Bryce Young's never played in a hostile environment. He played last season a little bit, but it was COVID, so fans weren't able to play. Take me back to your playing days. Was the crowd ever such a big factor to where you had to change your complete game plan, where you couldn't communicate with your guys? And how do you think Bryce Young will be affected with the Swamp Saturday?
Well, as a player, you honestly, especially an offensive guy and a quarterback, you got so much going through your mind. You don't even hear the crowd, really. It's just one big blur. I think where the crowd comes into play is it affects the offensive lineman hearing the snap count, whether it's a verbal snap count, a silent snap count, the clap the hands, however they do it. That can be an issue for the offensive line, which can give our pass rushers off the edge an advantage. But, Bryce Young's a talented player. As you mentioned, he hasn't played in a difficult environment. This will be by far the most difficult he's ever played in. And hopefully, I don't know if it'll rattle him, but maybe it can help us, down the road somewhere where, a lot of penalties or he'll make a mistake, but the crowd noise could play a factor.
For Emory Jones, the first two games, he's played well other than those four throws. Now, understanding those, you can't take away those four throws because it actually happened. But it feels like to me, and I was talking with Pat Dooley yesterday, and this was a good point. It seemed like to me that he was playing with a little bit of a lack of confidence. Now, Emory's not this rah-rah guy, so he's never going to show emotion. What do you think has been wrong with the throws that Emory's had and those interceptions so far?
He made a couple bad decisions, and he threw late. You're going to make some bad decisions here and there, but throwing late will get you killed. And, I don't know if we've ever had Trask threw pretty well on time, but Dan's never really had timing type throwers at the quarterback position. And that basically goes back to, if you look at Emory's 4 interceptions, most of them were late or he didn't put enough air on the ball. The trajectory was wrong. But, Emory's a guy who's waited his turn. I think everybody's pulling for him. People have seen what Anthony Richardson has done. And, I coached against Anthony Richardson in high school for 3 years, and he's a phenomenal athlete. But Anthony didn't always play great against teams that had really good athletes. So taking nothing away from what he has done, because he's going to be a tremendous player for Florida. But we got to see him perform like that against SEC caliber players. And whether he plays this week or not, I don't know. I'm sure he will. Thank goodness he plays quarterback, because that usually doesn't. If you have a hamstring strain, won't affect your play at the quarterback position unless you take off on a bunch of long runs.
Speaking of Anthony Richardson, you mentioned him being healthy. If he's able to go and he's I wouldn't say 100%, but about 80, 85%, how do you think Dan Mullen swaps the quarterbacks this week, knowing what he said Monday, that he's kept it pretty vanilla in the first 2 weeks?
I think you're going to see him in the third series again. Now, that's if he's cleared to play by the trainers, doctors, and the medical staff. It's not going to be up to the coaches whether he plays or not. So I would expect him to come into the third series, and we'll see what they have planned for him. Dan's done a tremendous job play calling for Emory. For Anthony. He hasn't asked him to drop back and read coverages and all that stuff. He did the other day at South Florida, and if you saw or heard Mullen's press conference, he didn't set the protection right. He missed the hot read. Then he missed a guy that was open, but he basically scrambled around and gained 18 yards. That's a great play. The fans see that, but Dan and the coaching staff realizes you can't miss the protection or the hot reads against top-notch defenses in the Southeastern Conference. So that's where the average fan doesn't understand why Dan is reluctant to let him play a whole lot right now. And Dan's dialed up some beautiful plays for him. The two long touchdowns were just beautiful plays, well designed, wide open receivers. So Dan knows what kind of player he has in him. They're going to take it slowly with him, but you're going to see both quarterbacks all year long, in my opinion.
Dan Mullen spoke a lot in the offseason, especially in the summer and media days, talking about two backs in the backfield. And he did it a little bit against Florida Atlantic. I don't think he did it as much against South Florida. One, do you think he's going to show that a lot more in this Alabama game? And two, what kind of problems does that face for a defense for having two backs in the backfield that are pretty good?
Gosh, I don't know what to expect. I mean, I don't think you can really show something to Alabama that they haven't seen or they're not prepared for. I think when people talk about showing a lot of the offense, it would be Florida lining up in five wides the entire game. Now that would surprise me. Or if you go back to last year, if we lined up in a two tight end set and never threw the football, that would be a surprise because we threw the ball so well. So I don't know if there's stuff that they're holding back on. A lot of people say that, but what Dan and them got to figure out is how can we move the football in Alabama? What gives us the most success trying to win this game? And I'm sure you'll see two backs in the backfield, but I don't think it's going to surprise Alabama one bit.
For Florida to stay in this game, I think defensively is going to be the biggest thing. I think offense can score points. I'm not worried about that. I think Dan Mullen has that well covered. Defensively, I told Pat yesterday, and I thought this right after the South Florida game, that I think Jeremiah Moon, Zachary Carter, and then you could throw in Ventrell Miller and Diabate. I think they have to play exceptionally well defensively and get pressure on Bryce Young. For Florida to compete, what does Florida have to do to keep it a game in the second half?
Well, we got to win the turnover battle by a couple, in my opinion. We got to force Bama to kick some field goals, and we can't settle for field goals. And then I think we need to make a big play on special teams somewhere. Defensively, as you mentioned, I think the three transfers, the two from Auburn, one from Penn State in the middle, are going to have to be play a big role. Stuffing the interior of the offensive line. And as you mentioned, the guys on the edge are going to have to create havoc for Bryce Young. He's a really good player. As you mentioned, he hadn't been tested a whole lot, but Alabama is so well coached. They're going to be ready to play. They got so many good players. They're used to these type of games. I think we're going to play well. I just don't know if we have enough to come out on top. But I think Alabama's going to have to help us. But crazy things happen in college football.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, and also, too, if you looked at Dan Mullen's biggest games at home, the LSU game 2 years ago, 2018, 2 years ago against Auburn, two top 10 teams at home. I think the LSU was a close spread. Auburn was the favorite. Of course, Alabama's a big spread. I think they're a 15, 16-point favorite. So it'll be definitely interesting to see. And no team has beaten Alabama in the SEC East since Steve Spurrier in 2010. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's that's a crazy stat right there. That's 11 years of playing Eastern opponents and nobody's beaten them. Florida played well last year in the SEC championship game, but it's a totally different team. Both teams are different, so you really can't take much from that. But with the crowd, Bryce Young first road test, Alabama still, I don't want to say the question marks, but the question marks going into the season were kind of on their offensive line. They lost a ton of skill players, but they lost a lot of good players on the offensive line. Like I said, if our three transfers can cause some problems on the interior and allow our edge pass rushers to get outside and put some pressure on him, who knows? He could throw it to us a couple times.
Yeah, hopefully for Florida fans, that's what they get. I'm Dylan Denmark alongside Shane Matthews. Shane, tell them how they can get a hold of your podcast.
Well, I'm Monday through Friday on Facebook Live. It's live at 8 a.m. till about 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and if you miss it, you can always.
I think we lost him for a second. Shane, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead and say it again for us. I caught you for the first 10 seconds.
Yeah, so Pot Up with Matthews in the Mornings on Facebook Live, 8 to 9, Monday through Friday. If you miss it, you can always check it out on all those different podcast platforms like YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I don't know all friends and family to follow us and might enjoy our program.
Awesome. We'll definitely get that out there on our Twitter and Facebook. Shane, thanks again for the time, and I hope to see you soon, brother.
All right, Dylan, take care, buddy.